All right, it's time for our first Mercury retrograde, one of 4 in 2022. Now, if you've been listening to me for a while, you know that Mercury retrogrades are nothing to be fearful of. Instead, this is an amazing time to embody and rethink the social impact you want to create through your business. That's right, we have our Mercury retrograde in Aquarius. Welcome to the Savvy Luminary podcast, Astrology for Entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Leslie Tagorda, creator of the Astrobrand Method, business astrologer, brand designer, author, and Aquarius boss woman. I help visionary spiritual entrepreneurs and impact makers like you illuminate and amplify your unique star powers so you can be the luminary you were born to be. All right, Luminary, I have a pretty big episode for you. Not so much in big, like I'm just going to be dumping all this information on you. I'm really doing my best to kind of distill and come back to what is that bigger thing that I want to impact and impart upon you. So the reason why this is going to be a big episode is that I want you to have to put on your thinking cap on, but you're really big thinking cap on, because this Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, we'll talk about all of those details, but in Aquarius, and especially in our work, Aquarius is very much about envisioning a future for all. And this is really what social impact is. And I know that sometimes when we think about these like really big ideas, our feet can go in the ground and we can kind of stop ourselves before we even go forward, because we're thinking of just like all of the big problems in our businesses, in our world, that we don't even know where to take that first step. And so as I share more information about Mercury retrograde in this episode, I want us to really focus in on the foundational steps. Like, what is that one step that we can intentionally take on to be a catalyst through our work that will lead towards bigger change? Okay. You have the power to be a catalyst. It doesn't matter if you are impacting 1 million people or you're impacting one person. That impact, all of that collective impact from all of us, adds up to some really big impact in social change. So in this episode, if you can get through all the details and like distill everything, what I really want you to know about this Mercury retrograde is that this is our time to rethink the vision that you have about the future and your role as a change maker in your work for that future. Okay. It doesn't mean that we are changing the world in one flash. Sometimes that can happen for us, but for most of us, it starts with doing one strategic step. And that's what this Mercury in retrograde from Aquarius back through Capricorn wants you to understand. So just a little bit of a recap regarding Mercury retrograde. I have a bunch of episodes about Mercury retrograde. You can listen back to episode 53. You can listen back to episode 21, episode 16, episode 4. We get, normally 3 Mercury retrogrades a year, but in 2022, we get 4 of these cycles. And Mercury retrograde cycles, if you listen to a lot of pop astrology, you'll be freaking out. You'll be like, the sky is falling. Let's not do anything. Like Mercury retrograde, everything is happening is wrong. Misunderstandings and tech glitches and traffic jams, all of those things. And while, yes, those things can happen, if we really understand what the energy of Mercury retrograde wants us to, say, embody in our work or our businesses, we can actually work with this cycle effectively in our businesses to rethink, to redefine, to reiterate, to reorganize, and to reset. So it's a really powerful time, and it's giving us the space in our businesses and the opportunity to say like, hey, my work today, instead of just creating new things and pushing forward and hustling, is to pause. It's to reassess. Doesn't that feel so wonderful? Now, of course, because Mercury retrograde will be starting off in Aquarius and going back into Capricorn, we're playing with a couple of different archetypal energies in our businesses. Of course, Mercury retrograde itself is the cycle between the sun, our creative source, the what we do so well, and then Mercury, our ability to perceive and understand and communicate. So speaking, writing, teaching, all of those things. And so when Mercury and the sun have this cycle of interaction, it's a time where we get to reset all of those things and have like a redo. Okay. And so, because this is in tech forward Aquarius, this Mercury retrograde could probably impact your technology a little bit more than normal. So, yes, if this is you, make sure you have your computers backed up, make sure you paid for your cloud storage, make sure that all of your apps are well up to date before Mercury retrograde. If you're listening to this episode, I'm recording this episode on January 10th on Monday. This episode will drop on January 12th, Wednesday, and then our Mercury retrograde happens on the 14th. So if you're listening to this episode and you're like kind of worried about your tech, stop right now, get all your tech things, everything backed up right now. Do all your updates right now, because the closer you get to Mercury coming to that complete stop, the more chances for glitches that you have. Okay. Those are just kind of like just some preparation notes. But again, please don't freak out about it. Okay. If you're intentionally using this time to take a pause, to reset and rethink things and reorganize things, especially as it comes to that vision that you have for the future through your work, then the better you're going to be able to use this energy. So let's talk about this Aquarius energy and what it means to have vision and to have this idea of social impact. I know that seems really, really, really big, right? Like, how am I, just as an entrepreneur, going to impact society, impact the collective? Well, again, no matter if you're serving 1 million people or you're serving one person, it starts with you. When we think about social impact, really ultimately, the purest form, the distilled form of that definition is, how are we positively creating change in our society for our collective? Now, as an entrepreneur on a spiritual journey, I have a sense that you already know that your work is supposed to like nourish and feed into something that is like bigger than you. Yet you might not exactly have all of the dots connected to see how the impact of your work then creates this new vision of the future. Okay, so if we think back to last year in 2021, we had all of our Mercury retrogrades just in air signs. So with air signs, we're thinking about sharing information, we're about creating relationships, we are thinking about the interrelationships between people, between cultures. We're thinking all of those things with air signs, okay? Sharing information. Now, in 2021, we didn't do as much connecting in person as we'd like to. And things have really changed in terms of like social justice. And we can see where there are like different factions kind of conflicting right now about what it means to have social impact and social change, because there are a lot of us who don't want change to happen. And there are an equal amount of us that says like, hey, we have to make progress in going forward. And so the difference between last year and this year, where last year I was talking about the Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, about rethinking equitable success. This year, it's kind of it's like an evolution of that equitable success. Again, coming back to that idea of social impact, but because we're also doing it in Capricorn, the difference is that we have to actually be grounded in reality. what is the one thing that we can do here and now? And if we think about it in a more strategic sense, what is the one thing that we can do here and now that's going to have the biggest ripple effect forward, the biggest impact? And so with this Mercury retrograde, again, thinking about the future, thinking about this vision of the society and the future that we want to build, instead of getting like all over the place and overwhelmed with the big changes that have to come forth, this Mercury retrograde, I want you to bring in that Capricorn energy that we've been starting to play with and reframe in terms of like, what is that one strategic foundation? Because, a few weeks ago, I hope you've already done your mantra and you really set that foundation, that baseline of that belief system, and in which everything is going to grow for you, right? Getting down to the bones, your belief system that you need to carry forth in order to do the big, scary things in your business. Now, when we're thinking about social impact, and I'll define social impact a little bit more because I know that can kind of seem like really big. Like, how do we distill that? But we'll be thinking about like, what is that one thing that we need to do to make that change? So when we think about Aquarius and we think about social impact, of course, I'm thinking about it from a brand and a leadership perspective. In astrology, Aquarius, the ruler of the 11th house, is about society. It's about the collective. It's about our friends. It's about our dreams, our hopes for the future. It's also about the platforms and the people that we call in based on our philosophy of what we want to create in the future. I know when I'm working with a lot of my clients, like on their brand book or anything like that, one of the things that I really want to cultivate is this vision of the future that a business wants to create. Right. I was listening to a podcast earlier today. It was the Chris Brennan's Astrology podcast, and he was speaking with a futurist, somebody who works in VR, virtual reality, and somebody who works with AI, artificial intelligence. And it was an interesting part of their conversation where they were talking about the people, the creators of the future are not like the Elon Musks or the Jeff Bezoses or like the Mark Zuckerbergs. The creators of the future are the science fiction writers. And the reason why they talk about the creators of the future as being the science fiction writers is because the science fiction authors are creating a universe, a possibility of what we can aim for in the future. Because if we don't have a vision of what that future looks like, then all of the inventors and all of the innovators of this world they're not aiming for anything. And so it's really beautiful, this kind of idea of science fiction. If any of you are science fiction fans, you probably already know that I'm a big Star Wars and Star Trek nerd and I love Star Trek, especially because of the vision that they have created about the future, mostly peaceful society where everybody's needs are taken care of, where anybody can go after their dreams and whatever they want to work on because there's no need for money and things like that. There's no scarcity anymore. But there's also these ideas of Afrofuturism and indigenous futurism, where there are many more voices in this place of creating and writing science fiction as a possibility of the future. So the reason why I wanted to talk about that, becoming that author of a new future, is in this respect with our Mercury retrograde, you're being asked to be the author of your future, of the future that you envision of the world in which your work, yes, your entrepreneurship, your business, your change making, whatever your work is, how your work will then feed and return and nourish that vision of the world that you want to create. Now, you don't have to create this like ultimate manifesto. Now, you're more than welcome. You're invited to create a manifesto of the future that you'd like to create. But really what you need to have is kind of like this statement, maybe a paragraph, and this kind of vision or this philosophy or this view of the future is so important in your business because you use this view of the future to call in your larger community and society, right? Your larger collective, because the collective, that community that you build in your business, remember back in that last episode, like kind of the 4 parts of your business that you need a community. Well, how do you call in a community? One sure way to call in your community is to share your particular vision of the future and calling in all the people that want part of that vision. That is why your vision in your business is so important. So, for example, the vision of the future that I have that I would like to bring through in my work is to bring astrology and spirituality and intuition out of the shadows to be seen and harnessed as a strategic tool in growth and leadership. I also want to see diverse leadership so that everybody sees themselves as a contributing member and an expert in their own unique way, where we are all giving back in a reciprocal manner. I'd like to also see the ways of ancient and traditional forms of reciprocity in leadership and land management, how we then start to bring in more sustainable and equitable ways of doing business through these kinds of wisdom teachings. There's so many things that I really want to see in the future, and it really comes through about validating and valuing emotional and spiritual leadership. And I have this vision of the world. Maybe I didn't really speak it so clearly, which is great because then that's telling me, like, okay, I have a little bit to do here of my own work with really clarifying this vision and the social impact that I would like to have. Because for me, what is that social impact of people being able to see themselves as leaders, as diverse leaders, of all of us contributing in our own way? Well, the social impact of all of that, oh my goodness, it's so much. It's abundance, it's equity, it's everybody feeling like they belong. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Again, I don't have this exactly cued in and honed in yet, but that will be my work for this Mercury retrograde. Now, this social impact, if this again is feeling really overwhelming and just all so big, I want you to start to bring this in, to gather this in, because this vision and the social impact that you are creating, this view of the world and how you would like to see it, and how your work then nourishes this vision of the world, starts with you. Because the more inner work that you do for yourself, whether in your work about this ultimate vision that you have, the future that you want to create, maybe it's mindset work, or maybe this is spiritual healing, or maybe this is being able to see yourself as a leader, or healing relational skills that you might have. Whatever you're doing about that inner work, the more that you do, the more that you can ripple this forth into your community, right? Individual ripples out to the community. That community that you have is the community that you've built in your work, whether this is your actual business, like your clients or your groups, your collaborators. This could be your affiliates, this could be your friends, this could be your family, all of the communities that you have gathered around yourself. And that work that you do for yourself then lights the spark for the people in your community. Maybe the offerings that you're putting through in your work are helping elevate your clients and your members and your community. So it starts with you, then it expands to your community, the people that you know. But then this is where social impact gets really exciting, because now that you've lit the spark of change in your communities, they go forth and continue out that spark and ripples forth from your community. And this is where social impact starts to really snowball and blossom. And so, of course, if anything, we're thinking about Capricorn and being strategic, starting off with that one first step in your bones. If anything, then really focusing in on doing the inner work for yourself so that you can be of a bigger impact in your work, in the community that you've built, and then trusting and growing forth in the future to help your community then spark and ripple forth with others. So again, this Mercury retrograde cycle, really use this time to rethink the future that you want to see and the kinds of innovations that you want to bring into your work so that you are able to focus on that one thing. Remember, innovations aren't always about starting in the like using the latest and the newest technologies. Sometimes innovations are about returning to older ways of doing things, but seeing them in a different light. So let's take a look at some of the astrological details about this particular Aquarius through Capricorn Mercury retrograde. Remember that if you want to hear all about the Mercury retrograde cycle, I would head back maybe to episode 4, way back when, and you can hear what I sounded like 2 years ago. You'll probably hear the evolution in terms of, hey, you practice and you get better at things. But I still think that episode 4, that first Mercury retrograde episode, had a lot of information just about what is that cycle of Mercury retrograde. If you want to take a look back, head back to early February of 2020, go all the way back to episode 4 of the Savvy Luminary. So this Mercury retrograde, remember, it starts on Wednesday the 14th. And when I say starts, I really mean that Mercury hits reverse and goes backwards. If we go back to December 29th, when Mercury crossed into that Capricorn of 24 degrees, going through that first pass of the shadow zone, you were able to notice what breakdowns that you might be having in terms of thinking about social impact that you might have in your work, or seeing that maybe you don't understand the future, or you're trying to control the future, or thinking about like what's in the future and what's ahead, and finding that you can't exactly see it so clearly. And so notice what's breaking down and how that is really affecting your work. When Mercury goes retrograde on the 14th at the Aquarius of 10 degrees, mark that on your natal chart. Find Aquarius of 10 degrees on your natal chart and see if you have any natal planets near Aquarius of 10 degrees. Because if you do, and Mercury goes reverse on that part of your chart, that's like that beginning part of a Mercury retrograde, that day before, like on the 13th, the 14th, the 15th. Those are the days that we're going to really feel the glitches happening mostly. And so when Mercury goes retrograde from the 14th through the 23rd, that's kind of that first phase. And that first phase of the Mercury retrograde is where we get to rethink the change that we want our work to have on society, on the collective. You don't have to have any answers yet. This is just really about rethinking things, reorganizing things, seeing what you have, seeing what needs to change, seeing what's broken, seeing what you're like just done with, right? It's really this idea of noticing that oftentimes, especially in our Western culture, we don't spend enough time noticing. And when we don't spend time on reflection and observation, then we just kind of wander aimlessly, not really synthesizing all of the patterns and signs that are always showing us the way. And so from the 14th through January 23rd, I want you to rethink the change and the change making you want your work to have on the collective. At the midway point on January 23rd is called the combust, when Mercury and the sun meet up in the sky at the exact degree. They'll be meeting up at Aquarius of 3 degrees. And we can think of this midway combust, sometimes it's called a cazimi, as that full moon phase of the Mercury retrograde cycle. Just like in a full moon phase, there is an illumination. There is a new perception, a new understanding. And so when we think about this Mercury in Aquarius, Mercury and Sun in Aquarius, you will have a new understanding on what new understanding do you have about being a change maker? You will have a new understanding about your business's role in the collective of being that change maker. All the rethinking that you did for that week and a half earlier, you now have an understanding. Maybe you don't know exactly what to do about it yet. And that's okay. Just like the full moon, you have a new understanding, an integration of emotional and intellectual understanding. Same thing with this Mercury retrograde cycle, that midway point. Now, sometimes in Aquarius, especially since Aquarius's modern ruler is Uranus, and Mercury will be squaring Uranus and Taurus for parts of that time, sometimes this can feel really, really, really overwhelming. Like you put your finger in the electrical socket and you just kind of got shocked. And so let the dust settle if that is you. The ideas will come forth if you just kind of relax. On February 3rd, Mercury will station direct, meaning it'll stop on the brakes again. That's the stationing part, and change gears from reverse into forward drive at that Capricorn of 24 degrees. Now, when Mercury comes to that stop, when it's changing, just like at the beginning part, when it stopped to go reverse, when it stopped, anytime any planet stops, that's where we kind of feel that buildup. And so that's why the miscommunications will probably fire mostly at that beginning and that ending phases, because there's all of this understanding and perception. And when we pile on all of this information, we can kind of get a little bit confused. So after that February 3rd, I want you to start to be able to crystallize your impactful vision of the future and start to plot out some of the steps that your work will take. Again, being really cautious about paying attention to how you can focus and prioritize, because if you just want to try to do everything at once, you'll just get overwhelmed and nothing will happen. And then Mercury has to go forward again to leave the shadow zone until it passes outside of that Aquarius of 10 degrees. And this doesn't happen until February 24th. After that February 24th date, you'll be able to fully embrace your desired role in being a change maker so that you can take action on your new plan. Now, there's a number of ways that you can personalize and customize your Mercury retrograde in order to get more information and more insight about where you're supposed to bring more vision and where you're supposed to really create more change-making social impact in your business. Okay. So one of the things that you want to do, first of all, is to look at that area between Aquarius of 10 degrees and Capricorn of 24 degrees, because this is the area of your chart that Mercury is passing by 3 times. And right now, Pluto is going to be at Capricorn of 26 degrees this entire time. So Mercury will be kind of going back and forth on Pluto. And anything that touches Pluto really just has a much more deep understanding and a deeper perspective. And so the thinking and the thought processing that you're doing is not just on an intellectual level, but it's also on an emotional level, this pure understanding and this pure authentic understanding, okay, with Pluto there. And so Aquarius of 10 degrees to Capricorn 24 degrees. Look at the house or houses. You might have a couple of houses that contain this one area, because that house is the area of your business that wants this new revision, this new rethought vision of the future and social impact in your business. Okay. Now, also because Saturn or Uranus energy is going to be impacted, I want you to see that if you have either Capricorn or Aquarius energy, like if you have Sun, Moon, Rising in Aquarius or Capricorn, or maybe you have Saturn or Uranus on one of your angles, that means that you really have a lot of Saturn and Uranus energy. You're going to really feel the effects of this Mercury retrograde more than the rest of us. Okay. So let's take a look at these the house placements, because wherever this Mercury retrograde in Aquarius and Capricorn exists in your chart by house, this is inviting you to create your foundational step to be the change you want to see in the world through your work. Okay, so if you have this area mostly in your first house of self, your Mercury retrograde invitation is to think about your work, rethink your role as a change making leader and how you share that power with others. Now, if Mercury retrograde will mostly be in your second house, I want you to reevaluate your social values and how they add value through your business and how you share that value with others. If the Mercury retrograde will mostly be in your third house, I want you to really be thinking how you can refine and communicate your radical message to promote your business as an agent of a change. If Mercury retrograde is mostly in your fourth house, you are here to recreate your safe communities of diverse beings to create innovative inclusion in your business. If you have Mercury retrograde in your fifth house, then think about how you are going to reignite future forward creative enterprises and causes that set your business and brand apart. If you have your Mercury retrograde mostly in your sixth house, you want to be reorganizing your innovative ideas of service through your business as being part of the greater collective. If you have your Mercury retrograde mostly in your seventh house, you might be a Leo rising, where you're here to rethink your collaborative partnerships in your business with other change makers, bringing in the future over a shared cause. If you have your Mercury retrograde mostly in your eighth house, reflect on healing the past as a necessary part of healing the future in and through your work. If you have Mercury retrograde mostly in your ninth house, then I want you to reimagine sharing your innovative vision of the future as a contribution to the wider world. If you have Mercury retrograde mostly in your 10th house, you are here to recommit to delivering your breakthrough innovation as a platform to creating equitable success for society. If you have Mercury retrograde mostly in your 11th house, you are here to reactivate your greater social networks of change makers through humanitarian values and activism. And lastly, if you have Mercury retrograde mostly in your 12th house, reveal what innovative reformations are needed to restore truth in and through your business. So remember, the house that contains the area between Capricorn of 24 degrees and Aquarius of 10 degrees is where you are meant to rethink the social impact through your work. And if things feel overwhelming to you, I want you to think of your foundational step, the one step to be the change you want to see in the world through your work. I know it is a big ask. And before I leave you here, I wanted to answer a few questions from my free Facebook group, The Savvy Luminary. If you're not already in The Savvy Luminary, head on over because it's the perfect place to spark a conversation about how to use astrology in your work. So again, that's a free community, The Savvy Luminary on Facebook. So Mina asks, can you help me understand this energy better with an example of similar relationships in nature? How can we flow with it easily? Oh my gosh, yes, so much. And so when I think about this relationship in nature, I'm so glad that you're asking that because this is one of the revolutions that's coming with is to see how nature isn't just an individual piece, right? If we think about a tree, there's actually like an entire network, a whole technological, biological, technological network under these trees where all of these trees are not just living for themselves, but they're living for the whole. And so, Mina, when you think about this relationship in nature, we can also think about the reciprocal living that all these trees have and say like the mycelial networks that run under these trees where they're communicating over these pathways. And so if there is a tree in distress where maybe that it's being attacked by some insects, it'll send a chemical communication communication through those networks and let the other trees know that, hey, we're getting invaded by these pests. Can you send in support? And so they're communicating over this network where they're all sharing resources, or where maybe there's this one really great tree that has more access to the sun and nutrients and rain. And it's then sending all of these nutrients and resources to littler trees, like maybe baby trees that haven't yet been able to reach the sunlight, but it really needs the sunlight. And so these trees are working in a community. Now, are they rethinking things? That is a question that I don't have the answer to. But when I'm thinking about the social impact that we want to have, I'm really thinking about these communities of trees and how they're communicating with each other. I'm not sure if a tree rethinks its own philosophy and its own role in a society, or if there's always more of a bigger collective communication for these trees. But that's what I have for you. And I hope that that helps a little bit with your question, Mina. Sarah asks, which planets or houses in our charts can we use to help focus the rethinking of our Mercury retrograde period? Great question. Well, I just gave the house activation. So definitely, Sarah, I want you to take a look at your chart and see which area of your chart contains, which house contains that area of Capricorn of 24 degrees to Aquarius of 10 degrees. That is that area in your business where you really want to focus your rethinking. What area of your business wants to be seen as a change maker that is impacting social change in your business? Now, of course, the planets, we want to think about Mercury, because Mercury is about rethinking and having a new perception and a new understanding. But we also have Uranus and Saturn in play. The reason why we have Uranus and Saturn in play is that, well, Uranus is the traditional ruler of Aquarius, and Uranus currently in Taurus is going to be squared with Mercury a lot of that time, as Mercury is going back and forth in that one area. And so with Uranus in there, we're really thinking about how can we innovate? How can we revolutionize? How can we make new all of these changes that we want? And then Saturn, because Saturn is also the traditional ruler of Aquarius as well as the ruler of Capricorn, Saturn wants to say also, because Saturn in this respect, as ruled by Aquarius, it's not about the old rules and the old structures, but it's really about what rules do we need to break? What rules in society and in our social impact are not really supporting and allowing the whole to live? And these are some things that, over the last couple of years that we have been really dissecting and deconstructing, and we will continue to do this over the next 2 years as we are breaking down old systems of oppression that don't work for most of us. And then also for us as change makers and entrepreneurs, there's still many old systems that we still hold on to that cause us to burn out and overwork and, create a lot of scarcity in our lives. And so those are some of the energies that are really coming through. So I hope that answers your question, Sarah. So Sasha asks, what might Mercury with Mercury in Cancer opposing that Capricorn part look like for those of us? So she wants to know specifically because she has her Mercury in Cancer at 29 degrees. And as Mercury will be crossing through, it'll be entering Capricorn through that 29 degree mark. Well, Sasha, when Mercury crosses over that threshold of Capricorn of 29 degrees, you are right. You're going to be having a Mercury opposite Mercury. And so Cancer and Capricorn archetype is really based on this sense of responsibility. Your Cancer Mercury is so understanding. You probably have this really depth, this really depth of emotional understanding and emotional perception. And so when Mercury is crossing over and Mercury to Mercury, you're going to have this full illumination about okay, I really can see my emotional understanding and perception as this strategic Capricorn tool in my work, in my business, in my sense of expertise and inner authority. So I want you to start, Sasha. What's really coming through for me is seeing this as an innovation for you, how you're going to be impacting social change through your business by giving value to that emotional understanding, that it's not just this something that's on the side, but it's something that's coming up to the center, to the core of the work that you are here to do. So I hope that helps you, Sasha. And then Keisha, of course, Keisha asks, how can those of us with natal Mercury retrograde use this energy? And so, some of the facts of Mercury retrograde is that Mercury spends about 19%, or that's close to 20%, 1/5 of its time in reverse. So there are a number of us that have Mercury retrograde in our charts natally. If you don't know how to find this out, look at your natal chart, grab your free version of your natal chart, find the symbol for Mercury. And if you have a little RX next to that symbol of Mercury, you indeed were born during a Mercury retrograde. And so for those of us that have Mercury retrograde natally, this really just feels like a coming back to home. So while other people are freaking out about Mercury retrograde, especially, like if you have a Gemini and Mercury or a Virgo and Mercury, or like another really fast forward Mercury, Mercury retrogrades can really like throw the wrench in everything. But for the rest of us who have this Mercury retrograde natally, when we come back to this kind of cycle, it just feels like we're coming back to home. Like people finally understand us. We understand ourselves sometimes when things get like confused or our words get taken out of context or things like that. For those of us that have Mercury retrograde, it just feels like this time of ease in communications. And so you still have to double check your work, but use this time to really get your downloads and really like get your understanding, and maybe take advantage of some writing time or some content creation time with this Mercury retrograde. Well, that was fun. And I hope I didn't overwhelm you with all of this information, because I know that there is so much, but I really wanted to give you the highlights of why this Mercury retrograde is so important, why it's so important for you to have a vision of the future, and why it's so important to see yourself as having a role as that change maker in the future. That would feel so amazing to me, because that is part of my vision for you to step into your own strategic expertise. So if you have more questions about this Mercury retrograde, please head on over to my free Facebook group, The Savvy Luminary. Start a conversation, ask your questions. I'm always happy to answer them and probably give you a little mini interpretation there as well. Lastly, before I let you go, thank you for listening. And remember, if you want to be a change maker and co-create with our ultimate luminary, the moon, grab that new book, New and Full Moon Rituals for Entrepreneurs and Change Makers, co-written by myself and Natalie Miller. It is now available on Amazon and all of those retailers in both print and Kindle format. All right, Luminary, I'm really looking forward to talking to you soon. Thanks for listening. If you love this podcast, please consider doing me a favor and heading over to Apple iTunes and leaving me a rating and review. Your rating and review helps this humble podcast get seen and found by more listeners like you. Please share the love.